Ancient Egypt wasn't just a civilization. It was a world of impossible architecture, powerful gods, hidden tombs, and knowledge we still don't understand. For over 3,000 years, it ruled as one of the greatest empires in human history. But then, it vanished. In this gripping 40-minute documentary, we dive deep into the rise, glory, secrets, and sudden downfall of the Egyptian civilization. From the mysteries of the pyramids to the forgotten pharaohs, this is the full story of ancient Egypt they don't teach in school. Before there were pyramids, before pharaohs carved their names into stone, before the world knew the concept of civilization, there was the Nile. This river wasn't just a body of water, it was the heartbeat of a nation that would defy time itself. In the vastness of a desert so hostile it could swallow entire armies, the Nile flowed like a miracle, carving life where there should have been none. Without it, there would be no Egypt. With it, Egypt rose to become the envy of the ancient world. Imagine a place where the entire calendar, economy, religion, and survival depended on the rhythm of a river. Every year the Nile flooded, transforming barren land into fertile soil. The ancient Egyptians didn't fear it, they worshipped it. To them, this flood was the tears of the goddess Isis, weeping for her murdered husband Osiris. It was divine intervention, a cosmic schedule that delivered both sustenance and spiritual meaning. From these waters came wheat, barley, and the power to build an empire. But Egypt's geography did more than feed its people. It protected them. Flanked by deserts on both sides, it was an isolated world, difficult to invade, impossible to ignore. This isolation allowed a culture to grow undisturbed for thousands of years, while other civilizations rose and fell in the chaos of conquest. Egypt stood as an ancient constant, unchallenged and undiluted. Still, this land was never simple. The Nile didn't just bring life, it demanded respect. It gave, but it could take away just as easily. Too much flood and crops were drowned. Too little and famine followed. The balance was delicate, and it taught Egyptians a lesson modern civilizations still struggle with. Nature isn't conquered, it's negotiated with, and this negotiation shaped everything. Cities weren't built randomly, they followed the Nile. Trade routes snaked along its banks. Temples aligned with the sun and stars rose beside it. Even in death, Egyptians wanted to be buried near its sacred flow. Life began with the Nile, and in their minds, eternity did too. So when we talk about ancient Egypt, its gods, its greatness, its golden age, remember that it all began not with stone or sword, but with water, a river that refused to stop flowing, and a people who learned how to rise with it. In ancient Egypt, the line between man and God wasn't blurred, it was erased. The pharaoh wasn't just a ruler, he was divine. To challenge him wasn't treason, it was blasphemy. Every monument, every inscription, every tomb is a reminder. Egypt's power came not from armies or riches, but from the belief that its leaders were walking gods. The Egyptian pantheon was vast, with over 2,000 deities recorded through the ages. Some were cosmic, like Ra, the sun god who sailed across the sky every day. Others were personal, like Bes, a dwarf-like protector of homes and childbirth. Each god played a role, but none more important than the concept of Ma'at, the divine order. Pharaohs weren't just enforcing laws, they were guardians of universal balance. This divine status gave the pharaoh immense authority over land, labor, and life itself. He was the high priest of every temple, the general of every army, and the owner of all the land. Taxes, architecture, rituals, everything funneled back to the throne. But this wasn't just political power. Egyptians believed that without a pharaoh to uphold Ma'at, the sun might not rise, the Nile might not flood, and chaos would consume the world. What's even more fascinating is how the pharaoh's image was carefully curated. He wasn't just shown as a man. He was portrayed as eternal, idealized, godlike. Every statue was built to immortalize not a personality, but a symbol. And that symbol was stability, immortality, divine protection. Even female pharaohs like Hatshepsut were depicted with masculine features to fit the god-king image. But this divinity came with crushing pressure. A failed harvest? The pharaoh must have lost the god's favor. An invasion? The pharaoh's magic wasn't strong enough. And when dynasties shifted or rulers were overthrown, the first thing new leaders did was erase the names of the old, as if cutting them out of history could undo their divine claim. The power of the pharaoh wasn't just about command. It was about illusion. It was a religion, a performance, a political strategy, and a spiritual anchor all rolled into one. And for over 3 millennia, it worked. The people obeyed, the gods were honored, and Egypt thrived. Until, of course, it didn't. The Great Pyramid of Giza is 4,500 years old. Let that sink in. It was already ancient when Julius Caesar visited Egypt. When Cleopatra reigned, it was a relic from a civilization she could barely comprehend. And yet, it still stands, not just as a tomb, but as a defiance of time, a riddle in stone. How did a Bronze Age civilization with no modern tools lift stones weighing up to 80 tons and arrange them with mathematical precision that aligns with the stars? The official answer? Ramps, ropes, manpower. But for centuries, scholars, scientists, and conspiracy theorists have wrestled with a deeper question. Could it have really been that simple? Egyptians didn't leave behind blueprints or how-to guides. What they did leave were inscriptions of gods handing rulers the power to build, and priests performing rituals over stones. To them, construction wasn't engineering. It was divine magic. Temples weren't just buildings. They were sacred machines, powered by the harmony between heaven and earth. And it wasn't just the pyramids. Massive obelisks, some over 100 feet tall, were carved from single stones and transported across vast distances. Underground tombs were dug with such precision that even modern architects marvel at their symmetry. The Temple of Karnak, the Sphinx, the Valley of the Kings, each one a marvel, each one a whisper of a knowledge we no longer possess. What makes these structures even more mysterious is their celestial alignment. The pyramids of Giza align almost perfectly with Orion's belt. Temples were constructed to capture solstices and equinoxes. Was this religious symbolism, a calendar system, or a code we've yet to crack? Modern tools can barely replicate their precision, and while mainstream archaeology has answers, skilled labor, advanced planning, ingenious tools, the questions persist because the perfection is unsettling. This wasn't just labor, it was legacy. Every stone told a story of control, belief, and a civilization determined to leave behind something immortal. The builders of ancient Egypt weren't just architects, they were mathematicians, astronomers, magicians, or maybe something we don't even have a word for. And what they left behind continues to baffle, inspire, and defy explanation. Because when you stand before the pyramids, you don't just see a tomb, you see a message, one that says, "We were here, and we were greater than you could ever imagine." Death, to the ancient Egyptians, was not the end. It was a transition, a passage into a world more important, more permanent than the one left behind. While other civilizations feared death, Egypt planned for it. They designed entire cities for the dead. They wrote books about the journey beyond. They wrapped their rulers in linens and spells, preparing them not for a grave, but for eternity. At the center of this obsession with the afterlife was the Book of the Dead, a sacred text filled with spells, passwords, and instructions for navigating the perils of the Duat. the Egyptian underworld. It was a guidebook, not for tourists, but for souls. The deceased had to answer questions, pass trials, and face judgment, and the stakes, eternal paradise or annihilation. Central to this journey was the weighing of the heart. The heart of the dead was placed on a scale, balanced against the feather of Ma'at, the principle of truth and order. If the heart was lighter, the soul lived on. If it was heavy with sin, it was devoured by Ammit, a monster part lion, part hippo, part crocodile. No second chances, no appeals, just total erasure. This belief system wasn't just about hope, it was about control. It kept society in line. Be just, be truthful, honor the gods, or be lost forever. Even peasants believed they could reach the afterlife if they lived rightly and were properly buried. That's why tombs weren't just for kings. Even the poor placed amulets with their dead, hoping to buy a sliver of eternity. But for the pharaohs and nobles, death was an architectural event. Massive tombs, hidden chambers, and booby traps designed to protect their remains and their riches from robbers and from spiritual disruption. Mummification was treated with ritual precision, organs removed and preserved, the body dried, perfumed, wrapped in hundreds of feet of linen, not just preserved, but transformed into something eternal. What's staggering is how effective this system was. Mummies thousands of years old are still intact, spells still visible on papyrus, gold still gleaming from untouched tombs. The ancients believed the body had to remain whole to house the soul. In keeping the dead alive, they achieved something the modern world still dreams about: immortality. And perhaps that's why we're still obsessed with Egypt. Because in every sarcophagus, in every faded glyph, we're not just peering into a grave. We're peering into a civilization that refused to be forgotten. A people who built not just for their lives, but for their deaths, and for us. If there was ever a time when Egypt seemed invincible, it was the New Kingdom, a period of expansion, wealth, and breathtaking ambition. Stretching from 1550 to 1070 BCE, this was Egypt at its absolute peak. The pharaohs weren't just rulers, they were conquerors, diplomats, builders, and legends. And their empire reached farther, shone brighter, and stood stronger than ever before. It was during this time that Egypt pushed its borders beyond the Nile, reaching deep into Nubia and clashing with empires in the Levant. Military campaigns became showcases of power, led by iconic figures like Thutmose III, who never lost a battle, and Ramesses II, the so-called master of monuments. Ramesses didn't just win wars, he built entire cities, temples, and statues of himself, so large that even today they leave visitors speechless. But military power wasn't Egypt's only weapon. This was an era of cultural renaissance. Literature, art, music, and science flourished. Temples were no longer just places of worship. They were libraries, observatories, and administrative hubs. The Temple of Karnak grew into one of the largest religious complexes in the world. And at Abu Simbel, Ramesses carved his legacy directly into a mountain, a divine message set in stone. Diplomacy also played a critical role. Egypt signed the first known peace treaty in human history, the Treaty of Kadesh, with the Hittites after decades of brutal warfare. Royal marriages with foreign princesses secured alliances. Trade routes stretched from Mesopotamia to the heart of Africa, bringing in lapis lazuli, incense, ivory, and exotic animals. Egypt became the center of a global network, respected and feared in equal measure. And then came Akhenaten, the heretic king who tried to overthrow centuries of religious tradition by replacing the pantheon with a single god, Aten. He moved the capital, erased old deities, and sparked a cultural revolution that still baffles historians. His son, Tutankhamun, would reverse his reforms, and though he died young, his tomb would become the most famous archaeological discovery in history. The Golden Age was more than wealth and conquest. It was a time when Egypt believed it had mastered the universe. The pharaoh was divine, the gods were near, and the land was abundant. But golden ages never last. Behind the scenes, cracks were forming. In the economy, in politics, in the priesthoods that were growing too powerful. The same gods that once united Egypt would soon become points of division. But in this shining moment, Egypt stood as a beacon to the world, a civilization unmatched in beauty, belief, and ambition, a kingdom so glorious that even its ruins would inspire generations to come. No empire falls overnight. Egypt's decline was not a single collapse, but a slow, painful unweaving, pulled apart by foreign invaders, internal corruption, and the weight of its own legacy. What had once seemed eternal began to crack, not with one catastrophe, but with 1,000 quiet failures. The first major blow came from within. As Egypt's priesthood grew in wealth and influence, it began to challenge the pharaoh's divine monopoly. Temples amassed land, collected taxes, and wielded armies. In many ways, they became a state within a state. Power was no longer centralized. Decisions fractured, authority weakened, and enemies took notice. Around 1650 BCE, the Hyksos, a foreign Semitic people, entered the delta and seized control. They brought new technologies, horse-drawn chariots, superior bows, and bronze weapons, exposing just how vulnerable Egypt had become. Though eventually expelled, their presence shattered the illusion of invincibility. Egypt, it turned out, could be conquered. Then came the Libyans, the Nubians, the Assyrians, and the Persians, each taking turns ruling Egypt, each draining it of identity, autonomy, and pride. Pharaohs became figureheads or foreign puppets. The grandeur of past dynasties faded into memory, their monuments buried in sand, their names forgotten or overwritten. Externally, Egypt faced new threats. Internally, it was crumbling under its own rituals. The economy suffered under the weight of endless temple donations and massive building projects. Famine, drought, and the loss of key trade routes pushed the population to its limits. The spiritual unity that had once defined the empire became fragmented. Local cults clashed. Faith turned into politics, politics into chaos. And as the empire weakened, so did its ability to control history. Tombs were robbed, statues were defaced, dynasties were erased from records. The stories of powerful queens, wise rulers, and epic battles were lost, or rewritten by those who came after. Egypt, the land of eternity, was beginning to forget itself. But through it all, one truth remained. Egypt was too important to ignore. Its resources, its strategic location, its symbolic power, everyone wanted a piece. But every conquest chipped away at its soul. The world was changing, and Egypt was being dragged with it, not as a leader, but as a relic being carved up by history. If the cracks of Egypt's decline had been spreading for centuries, the final blow came with dramatic flair, in the form of ambition, betrayal, and one woman whose story still echoes through time. Cleopatra, but even she couldn't stop the inevitable. The fall of Egypt wasn't just the end of a kingdom, it was the curtain call for the last great civilization of the ancient world. By the time Cleopatra VII took the throne in 51 BCE, Egypt was no longer ruled by native pharaohs. It had been under the control of the Ptolemaic dynasty, a line of Greek rulers installed after Alexander the Great's conquest. They spoke Greek, followed Egyptian traditions publicly, but ruled with Hellenistic strategies behind closed doors. Cleopatra, however, was different. She spoke Egyptian, aligned herself with Isis, and tried to restore the nation's soul. But Egypt was now a pawn on a Roman chessboard, caught between warring Roman generals, Julius Caesar, then Mark Antony, and finally Octavian, later Augustus Caesar. Cleopatra played a dangerous game. Her romantic and political alliances were meant to preserve Egypt's independence. Instead, they painted her as a threat to Rome. The final act came at the Battle of Actium in 31 BCE. Cleopatra and Antony were defeated by Octavian's forces. A year later, both would be dead, and Egypt, for the first time in its 3,000-year history, would become a Roman province. No more pharaohs, no more divine rule, just tax collectors, governors, and statues of emperors where gods once stood. But Egypt didn't just fall to foreign rule. It collapsed under its own weight. Its religion had grown rigid, its economy unstable, its political class fractured. The temples that once unified the people became symbols of stagnation. The magic was gone. The Nile still flowed, but the civilization that had once danced with its rhythm was now just an echo. The Romans admired Egypt's past, but they exploited its present. Temples were converted, gold was extracted, and ancient texts were destroyed or scattered. Alexandria's famed library, the greatest repository of human knowledge, burned. Whether by accident or design, it was the symbolic death of Egypt's mind. And yet, even in defeat, Egypt refused to disappear. Its language morphed into Coptic. Its symbols found their way into alchemy, magic, and religion across Europe and the Middle East. Cleopatra's face, the pyramid silhouette, the eye of Horus, they outlived empires. Egypt didn't just fall, it transformed. Egypt may have fallen, but it never truly vanished. Its monuments still pierce the sky, its myths still stir imaginations, its ideas about life, death, power, and the cosmos continue to ripple through time. No civilization has haunted the world more deeply, because Egypt didn't just leave behind temples and tombs, it left behind a message. That message is written in stone, in the towering obelisks that now stand in Paris, London, Rome, and New York, in the hieroglyphs that scholars once believed were uncrackable, until the Rosetta Stone revealed their secrets. Egypt's language, long silenced, speaks again. Its stories, long buried, continue to be uncovered with every archaeological dig. We inherited more than we realize. Egyptian medicine influenced Greek physicians. Its architectural symmetry inspired modern monuments. Its obsession with time and the stars paved the way for astronomy. Even the way we bury our dead, the tombstones, the rituals, the symbolism, echoes the beliefs of the Nile. And yet, mysteries remain. How did they move stones without machines? Why did they align everything so perfectly with the stars? What knowledge was lost when the Library of Alexandria burned? Who were the true minds behind their scientific marvels? These questions are not just historical. They're emotional, because Egypt doesn't just ask us to understand, it dares us to wonder. Today, millions visit the pyramids. They stand in awe before the Sphinx. They peer into golden coffins behind museum glass. But the real legacy isn't just physical, it's psychological. Egypt teaches us that greatness is possible, that humans can reach for the heavens, that memory matters, and that even a fallen civilization can outlive time if it tells its story well enough. And tell it they did. Through art, through myth, through monuments meant to last forever. Egypt never aimed to be temporary, it aimed to be eternal. And in that goal, they succeeded more than any other civilization in history. So the next time you hear the whisper of wind across the desert or the flowing waters of a mighty river, remember this: Egypt isn't just a place, it's a reminder that some stories are too powerful to die,